Hey folks, welcome back. This is another video, kind of the same thing as in yesterday's video, where I rediscovered an old plugin, an old friend. And sometimes I leave these plugins for newer and flashier plugins, but I always come back to them over the years and rediscover their richness of features, okay? So here we have a very simple kick and snare loop. Sounds like this. Right, very basic. It lacks top end, some textures on top. So it's just basically the synth or the basic synth layer for a drum bass loop. So kick and E-kick and E-snare, very basic. So let's say I want to layer in here some drum loops. I have something here prepared. Let's pull this in. So I have this drum loop here, also kick and snare in there, a lot of overlapping frequencies, but also a lot of frequencies not being in the first, synth or basic synth kick and snare loop here. So what we need to do is we need to EQ out some of the frequencies we already have here with this kick and the snare, right? So let's cut this here. And what you can do is you can just take an EQ5, EQ plus or some random EQ and just EQ around all the time. But what I do lately or recently is I use a match EQ. And I don't use my usual match EQ, which is the Ozone 8 thing. I use the CurveEQ, which is a very old plugin, and I have this probably for around 20 years. And like I said, I sometimes leave these old plugins for newer, flashier ones. And that's most of the times okay, but sometimes you need more features, right? So here we have this CurveEQ on the drum loop, and we want to move it first to the drum bus here. So we analyze, or we can analyze the kick and the snare here. So let's do this for a moment. Open up here the static and match feature. So now we just took here a snapshot of this frequency spectrum of this kick and snare synth loop. And we now can move, not copy, not clone, we just move it down to this drum loop. So there's no CurveEQ anymore here on the drum bus. It's now on this drum loop. So here we can do the same thing, right? We open up here the static and match pop-up, and we also want to analyze now the spectrum of this drum loop, and then we want to take a snapshot. So let's do this here. So that's it. So we took here a snapshot into the second slot, and now we can do something like, say, the first spectrum is our reference, and the second one is our spectrum we want to apply all the changes to. So then we match the spectrums here with some points. We can choose between a lot of different options here, but let's say we want to have 40 notes. So match spectrum. You can see we have now here this wacky EQ curve. So what this plugin now tries to do is it tries to figure out the spectrum of the first kick and snare loop, and it tries to apply it to the drum loop here to actually match in the frequency distribution. That's not what we want to do. We actually want to do the opposite, and you can do this with this plugin here pretty easily by just hitting this button here called Inversion or Invert. Right, so you can invert this curve. So now with this, we can also change the amount, of course. So now we EQ out all the frequencies from this drum group here, from this drum loop. And that's perfect for layering or meshing these sounds together, because we remove all the frequencies we already have with this kick and the snare from this drum loop, and leave in all the frequencies that we don't have in the first kick and snare drum loop, right? So it's perfect. So this is how it sounds now. Maybe a bit too loud. also. Yeah, and you can see it here on the graph. We EQ out the kick drum here and also the snare drum. And then we boost here all the top end. And we really check our board frequency-wise all the stuff from the drum loop into the first drum loop. So it's basically perfect. And do this sometimes also for percussion loops, also for drum and bass. So when you have a bass sound that has a lot of overtones, you just, analyze the spectrum of the drum bass, and then you EQ all the stuff out on the bass bass. Okay, so you can say, well, why not use something like Soothe or something like DSEQ 3? The problem with this is that these kind of plugins are very CPU hungry most of the times, and the spectrum is not static. So they try to analyze constantly and constantly change also the frequency spectrum. So this one is completely static. You apply one EQ curve that is perfectly static in time. It doesn't change and you can count on it. And of course, here the CPU or the latency is not that big. We can also switch this here to minimum phase if you have problems with some swooshy kind of sounds, because when you have this here in linear phase, right, you have some drastic EQ changes here. It can sound kind of weird. And with this minimum phase button here, you can bring back the snap or the percussionness of the sound of the drums. So in my opinion, very nice to have. On top of that, you can also not only match just the spectrum, you can also just select your multiple points. Let's say at the low end, and you can apply a different amount, right? Or just invert it, or maybe use here Shift and double click and remove all these nodes. Bring on your own nodes, or maybe make here a low cut, something like this. Change the range so we can pull this down. And you can also select here only the top end and then use then here the mount knob and only change this, or just a few points, or add points, or remove points. So you have all the options for matching one spectrum to the other. And if I use Ozone, with Ozone I have just an amount knob and a smoothing knob, and that's it. I can't invert the spectrum, I can't select points, remove here, for instance, the bass matching. So sometimes when let's say you have a drum loop, right, and you want to match this drum loop to a frequency spectrum of a full range track of of a ready master track where there's this bass in there, a low sub in there. And you match the spectrum, and then of course on your drum loop you have no sub, right? So this match EQ then tries to boost here the sub end to no end. And you can just step in here and just remove this, or remove these nodes and completely remove it from the matching process, which is sometimes really nice to have. So that's what I want to show you here in this video. CurveEQ is very old. Probably a lot of you have already this in place. Maybe try it out next time you want to layer something. It's very nice. And if this video is watched by Alexei, maybe Alexei, you can bring in some of these features of this pop-up here into the main GUI to have some quick access, because you need to open up this pop-up all the time. And it's a bit annoying over time. So it would be nice to have something like here the reference button or the apply to button here in place, right? So you analyze the spectrum, you hit reference, this button, and then it takes a snapshot and then puts it also at the same time into the reference slot. Same thing with apply to, and then maybe here match spectrums button here that uses then, I don't know, 30 points. So just to have some quick access to these features outside of this pop-up would be nice to have. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Leave a like. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. See you in the next video, and bye.